I'm all excited. I'm like, okay, we found him. He's at the storage unit. He's probably digging stuff out of there. And while I'm gathering my stuff up, his dad calls back and he's like, he's dead. And I'm like, what? He's like, he's dead. And he couldn't say anything else. I just froze.
Welcome to the Purpose Podcast. I'm Corrie and I teach and inspire others to release negative emotions like fear in order to unleash incredible personal growth. Every other week, we bring you stories of overcoming adversity from resilient individuals who have chosen to use their trauma as fuel to accomplish amazing achievements. Thanks for taking the time to join me today, and let the story begin. You're listening to the Purpose Podcast, episode number 3, Surviving Suicide with Tiwanda Pierce. On today's show, I had the pleasure of speaking with Tiwanda Pierce. Tiwanda is a gifted artist, author, poet, inspirational speaker, and transformational life coach. She uses art as a direct link to negative energy release and peace deposits in combination with life coaching to strengthen communities, enhance the quality of relationships, build character, and promote self-development. Tiwanda's life experience she shares with us on the show is that of incredible strength. After enduring the trauma of sexual assault as a teen, she attempted to take her own life not once, but twice, but luckily was not successful. During this time frame, she started using self-harm, specifically cutting, as an outlet for her pain for many years. It wasn't until her son introduced her to painting that Tiwanda learned that art could be an effective outlet for expressing pain. When she lost him to the very same demons that tortured herself as a young adult, she was determined to make sure that other young people don't suffer the same way she did. Now, through canvases and conversations, she's helping make an impact on the mental health and well-being of others for time to come. Tiwanda Pierce is on a journey to see lives valued and saved, one reverenced and irreplaceable life at a time. Tiwanda's story is one of incredible strength and perseverance, and I cannot wait to share it with you today. Now it's time for the story to begin. Hello and welcome to the Purpose Podcast. Today we've got Tiwanda Pierce on the line, ready to chat with us. Hi, Tiwanda. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Hi, how are you?
I am good, thank you. We're so excited to have you on the show today to share your stories and experience with us. As I always start off this podcast, there's no better way to really get to know someone's story than to start off from the very, very beginning. So, Tiwanda, what was your childhood like? What would you like to share with us? How did that look for you?
My childhood was I personally was pretty quiet. I had both my parents in the home and we were pretty close, but I was just a little different than my siblings. I was very quiet, very kept to myself. People call it secretive, but it was just my character and who I was.
So did you consider that like you were more or less introverted?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very shy, very introverted, and very just to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And then as you grew up and went into middle school, in high school, mm-hmm. We had discussed a few things earlier on, as far as when you started dating and stuff like that, and that you had some pretty traumatic experiences at that time. Would you mind sharing for the audience what that experience was like for you?
Sure. I first fell in love, if you call it that, at 13 and had my heart broken. And a year later, I was date raped. And I held that in and kept that secret and quiet for 4 years. Wow. But yeah, I didn't tell anybody until I was about 18. But when I was 16, just the impact from that and the secrecy and trying to hold all of that in and just, my perspective on life and seeing life in a negative light, it just all caught up with me. And at 16, I first attempted suicide. And I took a razor and I cut my wrist, but I didn't cut deep enough.
Oh my goodness.
So I cut my wrist, and from that I became a cutter. If you don't know what a cutter is, they cut themselves, they cut marks on their bodies, and it's like we're trying to replace the emotional agony and pain with the physical pain. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people cut themselves and they cut anywhere on their bodies, but I cut my wrist a lot and I cut my thighs and I covered it up. I always wore like long sleeves and shorts that would cover the marks on my body so that nobody would know that I was dealing with this. And I did that up until I was probably like 21.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you have any suicidal ideation prior to the date rape? Or was it a result of your experience, the trauma going through
So
that, I think?
from what I remember, I was just pretty happy. I was just a low key person, but I was pretty happy
Mm-hmm.
until, the relationships and the heartbreak and then the rape, and just life just seemed so unbearable. And I didn't know, especially because I didn't open up to anybody. I didn't open up to my parents or my family and let them know what was going on or what I was dealing with or what I was feeling. I didn't even understand depression at the time. I didn't even know what it was. I just knew that life seemed horrible and I didn't understand how to maneuver through it and see the beauty and the good in life. So
Sure.
it just seemed like one negative thing after another was piling on top of me. And honestly, I don't even know how the idea of suicide came forefront, but it did. I just thought that I just want to end it all. I just want to take this pain away. I don't want to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so at 16, I had my first attempt with suicide and became a cutter from that.
Right. And through the cutting, just to recap, you felt a sense of almost like emotional release each
Right.
time that you cut. What was that? What did that feel like for you?
So just the physical pain, it's very painful when you're cutting yourself. It's very painful, and it almost takes away from life, from what you're dealing with life and all the emotional pain and anguish. So it's just the same way as people using drugs. They're trying to take away their pain and their suffering and their agony, and that's what cutters do when they're cutting.
Right. Okay. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So it's kind of replacing one pain for another pain.
Right. It's
or
just
like numbing it.
It's just another way to get high.
Right. Wow.
Basically. Yeah.
You were cutting up through, what'd you say, 21?
About 21,
Sketching?
yeah.
Okay. And then what happened for you at that point?
Well, in between that time, there was another rape. And I guess I got tired. I wanted a different solution than cutting myself. So I'm trying to deal with life and trying to find another solution. And it's really not working. And a couple years after that, I had my second attempt where I was going to commit suicide.
Oh my goodness.
And at that time, I was married and I had 4 young children. So, a lot of people think like, oh my goodness, how can somebody take their life when they have a family, they have kids? But when you're in so much pain and agony, you're not thinking about that. And when the depression has such a strong hold on you, you're not thinking about my loved ones and my family and what it's going to do to people. So you're just thinking about, I have this pain. How do I get rid of it?
Right. And for people who are only just learning about me, Corrie Logaitis and my story. So I relate a lot to what Tiwanda's talking about. I'm a suicide loss survivor. I very recently, this past summer, lost my boyfriend, who was a father, as well. And initially in the very, very early stages after the loss, I had a lot of difficulty trying to understand, how could someone do this, when you're leaving your children behind, especially because I knew for him, his children were literally his world. He lived, eat, and breathed around, his children's existence. And, trying to understand that, I did a lot of reading. And I remember one of the books I read, I think it was called Night Falls Fast. Have you heard of this book?
I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. It was a very good read. It was written by I believe it was a psychologist who was also bipolar.
Okay.
And she did a lot of research. She was suicidal herself at certain points during her life. But in the recounts and trying to kind of paint the picture for people who have not experienced suicidal ideation, she kind of described it as being like you're in this dark tunnel and all you could see is the light at the end of it. And that light is the ending of your pain. So you kind of, you zone out everything else. You're literally not thinking about anybody else that's in your life that would be affected by it. So was this experience similar for you? How would you describe going down that tunnel, I guess you could say, to even contemplating doing that?
That's so true. And I struggled, a bit because like I said, I didn't even have a name for what I was dealing with. I just knew like life just seemed so hard and so unbearable. And so everything was just so negative and it kept impacting. And like my children are my complete world. So I get that. I understand. And I wasn't thinking about their loss or what it would do to them. I'm just thinking like, how do I get out of this pain?
Right.
What do I do? And for a lot of people, they don't understand the resources. They could have been ignorant like I was as to the dealings with depression and the resources and the assistance and help that is out there. And a lot of people, they don't want to be labeled. There's a lot of labeling that goes on with depression and anxiety and other mental health matters. And we need to open up our worlds and our lives to understand that it's okay. It's okay. And if we can get past people labeling us, because our lives are more important than the labels that people place on us. And being happy, healthy, and whole is more important than somebody looking down on us because they don't understand what we're dealing with.
Right.
So I love the scenario in the book because it's completely true and completely how I felt. I didn't think about the pain or anything that I would cause or the struggles that I would cause anybody else. I'm just thinking like, I got to get out of this.
Right. And I think for a lot of people too, who haven't either experienced witnessing a loved one, going through depression or experiencing depression for themselves, that it's literally that when you get to that emotional state, it's actual physical pain, at that point. So really you're just looking to relieve that pain, which eventually it lets up, as you discovered yourself,
Right.
actually let's talk about that too. So I know that you had, a life-changing moment, after your second almost attempt.
Right.
So what was that next morning like for you? I know it. I want you to tell, tell the audience.
So I had searched for the gun that I knew that was in the house and I couldn't find it. Like my babies, they were downstairs with my husband at the time. And I'm searching my bedroom looking for the gun and I find a bullet and I'm just so mad because I'm like, I just want to end this all. I just want all this pain and heartache and trauma and everything to end. So I take the bullet and I put it in my mouth and I'm like just crying and I cry myself to sleep. And I wake up the next morning and I'm kind of remembering the night before, like, am I alive? Am I not? So I jump up and I, run to the window and I hear these birds chirping and I'm, feeling my pulse and I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm still alive. And at that moment, I realized like, I don't want to die. I want to experience life. I want to find a way to experience life, happy and in peace. But in my mind and my perspective on life changed at that point. It's not that life got easier, all of a sudden, but it's just the way I looked at life and the way I decided I was going to approach life was completely different. And I decided that I would never toy with the idea of suicide again.
Right.
So that was my turning point.
Well, it was almost like a literal and figurative awakening.
Right.
The next morning, wake up and
Exactly.
different way of viewing things. Wow, that's incredible.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about your children. Now that you're living life and you're doing it to your fullest and engaged with your kids. So I know we had talked briefly, about your son, Anthony, and how you two bonded over your love of art.
Right. So out of my 4 children, Anthony, he was so much like me. Like I understood Anthony because I'm a feelings person. So it was almost like I'm feeling what his life was like because it was similar to mine, seeing the negative and, not being happy and trying to figure life out beyond pain. So Anthony was around 12, 13 when he started really getting involved with art. So he had tried different sports, different activities, and the one year he had signed up for football and he was there long enough to take the picture and that was it. And he was done with that.
Just not destined to be an athlete at all.
At all.
It's funny though, most kids, you're either going to be artistic or athletic. There's very few that you find that they're both, right? So
right. So his brothers, they're very athletic. They did wrestling, baseball, football, like you name it. They were into it all. And he tried to, but that wasn't him, and I remember myself growing up and how, I just seemed to be a little different than my siblings. And I could see Anthony from out of the 4 of them just being a little different, which was fine. So Anthony, he did like little drawings, but for some reason, when he was about 11, 12, he took an interest in art. And it was literally like you had to get into Anthony's world to get any answers out of him or things like that. So I started, and I always dabbled in drawing, but when he started painting, I was like, okay, and he got excited about it. So I'm like, let me join in, let me get into Anthony's world with him so that I can bond and connect and understand and let him know that I see him. So I started painting, and he would make these drawings and paintings, and he would just have so much fun. And I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, like this is so much work. But he just loved it and enjoyed it. And it was just like something that just came naturally and easy to him. So we would sit down together and we would draw and paint, and we would compare. And if I drew something and painted something that he liked, he would just like light up. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna set this one aside and I'm gonna keep this one. So that was a way for me to enter into Anthony's world and to connect and bond with him. And we did that for about 5 good years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And did you find that through the artistic expression, that emotional release that you were in your younger years looking for through the cutting and stuff like that, that became an outlet for that? How did that end up merging into your life?
It was actually another outlet, because to release and to understand myself, I wrote. I journaled.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. I journaled a lot. I wrote poetry. So that was the early stages of me learning to release the pain and understand what I was going through. And once I started enjoying the art, it became another outlet and another release and a time of calming.
Right.
So taking that energy and putting it into something, and it comes out beautifully and creatively. So
that's beautiful. Those are 2 of the top tactics that I tell my clients, that I'm working with as far as like trying to get their emotions out of them. Journaling would be the first one, because journaling is the easiest. Everybody, for the most part can write, and you don't have to, have any kind of set expectation to it. It's just sit down with the pen and see what happens. Exactly. And art can be the same way, if people approach it in a similar manner. You don't put so much pressure on yourself that it needs to be, this perfect portrait, or it could just be a bunch of paint strokes on a piece of paper that are in beautiful colors that make you smile. It doesn't matter. The only person that matters is you in the relationship when you're creating the art for yourself, not for others. So that's beautiful.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be any structure or, it's just whatever comes out of you.
Right.
You're just releasing. So whatever comes out of you, lines, circles, it doesn't matter.
Whatever feels right in the moment, right?
Right.
Right. So I know when we had talked earlier that Anthony struggled in a lot of ways, the same ways that you did when you were a teenager. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
So Anthony, he was just, and I hate to use the word different, but I'm just going to use different. And he struggled a bit with life, I would say, dealing with life, dealing with school. He did have friends, but I just remember from real little, he was just so much like me, just off to himself and not really bonding, connecting, a little shy. But around his family and friends, he was just very, like, everybody just gravitated to him because he was just very social and very it's just like you wanted to be around him. And I understand now, because I'm like that sometimes too. Like, I could be very social, but then I need time to unwind and be by myself. So you need that balance and that break. So he just was a person that everybody just loved and enjoyed and wanted to be around. And he was always funny. He had this laugh, this giggle, was just really boisterous and hilarious. And, it was just fun moments and fun times of family gatherings and then just, watching him. And everybody was just so into his paintings, and we're just amazed, that he could come up with these creations and so effortlessly.
So I know at one point, Anthony's story did not end the way that you had anticipated it to.
Right.
So would you mind sharing with the audience Anthony's story.
Right. So I had, for a couple years, wanted to get Anthony in therapy and counseling. And after a battle, I think he was in middle school, and we did some therapy and counseling. He was not very excited and receptive to it. You know, the whole labeling thing, like people don't want to be labeled, people don't want to be looked at as outcast or different, and or even to think that something's wrong with them themselves, you know. So he was in there for a little bit, and he got out of that, and then he basically went into art. And you know, I thought it was like, okay, a safe zone. He has this art, it lights him up. And
so his depressed state happened before he found art.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see little things as he's grown up, and just remembering me and my life, and you know, not having answers or not knowing. I'm like, I can identify with he's going through, because that's similar to what I was going through. So to me, I'm like, let me get him help. I didn't know to ask for help. I kept everything, you know, secret. But I'm like, this is my son,
right?
And let me be an advocate for him. He, you know, he didn't want the help, but I could see that the help would be good for him.
Sure.
So we got him therapy. He was in that for a little bit. Then he went into art. And as he's growing, he was like so tall. Like I had to look up to him. It was just funny, but he was like my little buddy. You know, he was my youngest son, and we were very close. Like I said, I could relate to him. We did therapy when he was in his senior year in high school. We did some counseling then as well. And, you know, the counselor is like, oh, he's fine. He just wants to live life on his terms, you know, by his means. So I guess nobody really worried like I worried. I don't even know if he worried, but I know we had talks. And at one point I'm like, Anthony, I said, you don't plan on leaving me. I'm like, you're not going to take your life. He's like, no. He's like, but I don't want to get on medication or anything, because, you know, that makes things worse. So he went off to college for a little bit, and just like the sports, he decided college wasn't for him. So he came back home, and he wanted to get into modeling. And I thought, oh, different, because he was like kind of like an introvert. You know, he could be social, but he was kind of like an introvert. And I just thought, I'm like, that's so cool, you know, modeling. And that didn't turn out. And his cousin had actually committed suicide like right before Thanksgiving. And it was just like really devastating. And, you know, Aunt and I had talked, and he had talked with his dad, and he was like, you know, really sad about that. And he had wrote this book. I knew he was writing it, but I didn't even know, like, he finished it. And he finished his book. I think he published it. It was called The Bottom of the Barrel. So he published that on December 2nd. And we had a series of birthdays. Like, December is a crazy month for birthdays. I don't know why people do it when there's Christmas in December, but we had a series of birthdays, and he was there. You know, everybody's enjoying him and having a good time. And December 18th, he was supposed to start a new job. He was over his dad's house, and one of my other sons called me like the next morning, and they're like, you know, Mom, is Anthony with you? We thought he came in last night, but he didn't. And I'm like, no, he's not with me. So everybody's calling him and texting him, and, you know, there's no response. So we are, you know, his dad's looking on his computer, trying to see if he can find anything. He had left his bag, because he always carried his book bag around with him. And he had left his bag at his dad's house. So his dad's looking through his bag, and I'm calling him, and I'm like, it didn't matter if Anthony was at work. It didn't matter if he was in class. It didn't matter what. Like, when I called him, he either sent me a text or he answered. And I'm like, this is just so strange that he's not answering. So that was on a Monday. He was supposed to start a new job. And Tuesday, when my son called and asked me if he was there, So from Monday night to Friday morning, we were searching, just calling, looking,
Wow. For
searching.
that long.
That long. And we had, in the meantime, we're talking to different family members and friends, and we had learned that Anthony had a storage unit, and we learned that he had a gun. But we're not putting any of this together until I had met up with a friend. I was at the library Friday morning. His dad calls me. He's like, "Oh, I see Anthony's car outside the storage unit," because his dad kept riding by.
Mm-hmm.
When we found out that he had a storage unit, his dad kept riding by. So, I'm all excited. I'm like, okay, we found him. He's at the storage unit. He's probably digging stuff out of there. So,
Mm-hmm.
and while I'm gathering my stuff up from the library, his dad calls back and he's like, "He's dead." And I'm like, "What?"
Oh my goodness.
He's like, "He's dead." And he like couldn't say anything else. And I'm like, I just froze. And my friend knew, that Anthony was missing. And she was like, "Just tell me where he's at." And she just like grabbed the keys and drove me to the storage unit. And it was like the worst possible scene you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Just family and friends and everybody. It was like unreal.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony he was pronounced dead by a gunshot to his head.
I'm so sorry.
At 18.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the most unimaginable thing as a mother
Mm-hmm.
I could ever think about experiencing.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think we were shocked, especially from having the conversations and directly asking, like, "You don't plan on leaving or committing suicide, killing yourself?" And he's like, "Oh, no," he was just so bubbly.
Mm-hmm.
But depression and mental health matters. It's nothing to toy with. It's nothing to play with. It's nothing to think that, "Oh, I have life handled," because you really don't. You can't do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big fight and you need a lot of help. A lot of help.
And a lot of support.
And a lot of support,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
And he had a lot from you. I mean, to even be asking.
Yes.
This isn't something you're thinking about, right? That's more than a lot of people get in that,
right.
Depression, right? So you did everything that you could.
Right.
For him, and I know that's one of the things that's so difficult, especially even with my own grief, with my own suicide loss, is you're always thinking in the back of your head, what could I have said differently? What if I did this instead? What if I paid attention to that? But I mean, truth is, at least I can speak for myself looking backwards. Had I known back then what I know now, we wouldn't be in this scenario because I would have done it then. If it was within, my capability.
Yeah.
And I had done everything that I could at that point. And the guilt is definitely the hardest part.
Yeah.
About handling a suicide loss. And I'm so, so sorry for your loss of your son.
Thank you.
And I know we talked about this briefly, on our call the other week, but I think it might be of good use for our listeners. So since you had experienced suicidal ideation yourself and it attempted twice, how did that play into your experience after and the grief of your son?
I was in like shock. I was in a state of shock for like a good month and a half. And as I'm coming out, while I was in it, I was just painting it and making sure that my mental health was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing myself and dealing with depression, I just had to make sure that I was in an okay place, in a safe place, and that this wasn't going to set me
Mm-hmm.
over the edge. So, I did a lot of painting. And when I was able to come out of that state of shock, I went through a stage of trying to understand, trying to put the pieces together, trying to see if there was something more that I should have done or could have done. Now I say, had I known it was this bad, I'd have just put him in a straitjacket and just, did whatever I needed to do to keep him. But it took time for me to come out of that, blaming myself, like, "Oh, I should have done more." And actually I have a lot of peace with that because I loved my son. I loved him like I can't even explain.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always in his corner and I was always there for him. So I have peace within myself knowing that at least he lived 18 years
Mm-hmm.
with that love and support.
Yes. So much one-on-one time and attention too, for you to pick up an entirely new hobby in order to be able to connect with him.
Right.
That says so much about the relationship between the two of you. That's a beautiful thing to have been able to experience. And you said for 5 years, right?
Yes.
That you guys, painted together. How beautiful.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. After I got through that stage, then, has just so many answers like, why? Everybody wants to know why. And I was initially mad at him, like, why would you do this? Why does your life have to end now? Like, why? Everybody's left behind trying to deal with this and suffering through it. Like, why? But you have to separate the person from the illness.
Mm-hmm.
The illness takes on its own character and it's overwhelming and overpowering. I've dealt with depression for a very long time, so I know how overpowering it is. So once I was able to just, look at my son separate and then look at the illness, it made the questions go away, but it made it easier in dealing with it and understanding.
Right. The illness part, I think, is such a great way to put it, because I know for myself, in the research and everything that I've done, trying to make sense of my own experience, but, it's not like we get angry at people when they die of cancer.
Right.
Right. Or they have some other debilitative disease or issue, like cancer is the most common one. So, or, I'm not mad at somebody because they had a heart attack.
Right.
You can't control that. It's an illness, right? So mental illness is the same thing.
Exactly.
And I'm understanding even better. I mean, the signs were there from my boyfriends, but it was his own thing to experience. It had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with anybody surrounding him. It was his illness, just like somebody's cancer has nothing to do with their family, nothing to do with anyone around them. So that's a great way to put it. It makes it much, much easier also than remembering who the person was while they were alive and remembering all those good times that you have with them by removing the illness from your memories, kind of in a way, and remembering them for who they were to you and not for the way that they died. Right.
Right.
So I know that you're doing some really wonderful things now to keep Anthony's memory alive and to help other people heal. So why don't you tell everybody about the project that you're working on?
Yes. So before Anthony died, I just remember him saying, Mom, because he was back and forth, in school and my house, his dad's house. And he was like, Mom, I put some blank canvases and some art supplies in your studio. And I'm like, okay, not really paying attention to it. But after he passed, I'm thinking like he had his journey and his struggles. But I believe that he wanted me to continue on, and it's like I get to continue on with him. It's like I'm bringing Anthony everywhere I go through my art. So I have a business canvases and conversation where I combine art and life coaching. So it's just, like I said, the writing and the art is just a way of releasing the energy of pain. Mm-hmm. So I combine that with life coaching, and it's like Anthony gave me a journey and I'm continuing on, out of love for him and bringing awareness to other people. Like, don't suffer alone. When I was growing up, I was quiet. I suffered a lot. And Anthony, for whatever reasons, he wasn't very open about what he was dealing with, and I'm sure there's many things that I don't know that he struggled with. Mm-hmm. I just want people to know that you're not alone, and don't sit in silence, and don't worry about the labels and the stigma, because your life is so much more important than any of that. So I just want to bring awareness through speaking and through my business canvases and conversation that you're not alone, and that you don't want to hold on to the pain. There has to be a way to release it. Even with me dealing with Anthony being gone, art and writing, it's wonderful. It's helpful. Mm-hmm. So it's not just for people with depression or mental health matters. It's just anybody, like whatever you're dealing with, because we all deal with things. It's just a way to release and re-energize.
Mm-hmm. Everybody at some point in life goes through some kind of adversity. And this is actually a very large part of my platform and why I'm doing what I'm doing, especially with the Purpose Podcast in particular. And it's to show people that more people have experienced what you think than you thought. And
Right.
as a result of that, why are we assuming that there should be a stigma with it? Right? Because if you actually talk to people about it, you're going to find that more people have experienced the same thing that you have than have not. Right.
Exactly.
So really, we're all it's a self-imposed judgment on ourselves that we're going to be stigmatized for what we went through, where really the statistics speak otherwise. So this is actually a statistic that I think that you'll appreciate, especially since we're both suicide loss survivors. So
Hmm.
when I ran the numbers from last year, 800,000 people worldwide died by suicide. That's a person every 40 seconds around the world. If
Wow.
you think about it as a loss survivor, like you and I are, on average, each suicide victim leaves behind 6 people. So family, friends, so on and so forth. So that's an average number. If you break that all out, that's 4.3 million people a year that are affected by suicide loss. And
Wow.
even you had mentioned in your own family, you had a cousin, that went through it. And yet, people don't talk about it publicly, which was something that was frustrating for me initially going through my journey, and trying to find the places that I could talk to people who have experienced what I've experienced. And it's
Hmm.
kind of, I guess, in a way, that you're still painting with Anthony side by side with you. I kind of almost feel like, this podcast and the work that I'm doing now is kind of my way of continuing on what I was doing with my boyfriend in a way, because it's getting people to open up, about what they've experienced and being able to release it in a way that then it kind of brings them more power, not that they feel like they're in such a helpless and hopeless place.
Yes, that's good. And when people are dealing with stuff, be mindful of the things that pile up, especially if you're not releasing things. Like, be mindful of the things that are piling up that are negative. Like I
Mhm.
said, Anthony, he went to school, decided it wasn't for him. He tried modeling, that wasn't for him, was supposed to start a new job. It's different things that pile up and it could catch you off guard. And before you
Mhm.
know it, you feel like you're stuck and you're in this place where, oh my goodness, how do I get out? So you have to pay attention to that as well. That's really important.
Yeah, it's one of the things, and I actually have written about this extensively, but one of the things that I recommend to my clients that are stuck in that negative mindset each day is to start a morning gratitude practice.
Hmm.
Very first thing, just think of 3 things. And I think what sticks a lot of people where they don't take action on doing it is they think that gratitude needs to be some kind of a grandiose gesture,
Yeah.
right? That it needs to be like, I am grateful for life and I'm grateful for sunshine. And it doesn't need to be that way. You could be grateful that you did laundry yesterday and you don't have to do it today.
Right.
Right? It's little things that you
Right.
can be grateful about. And by starting off your morning with just 3 of them, again, I don't need to walk the dog because my husband did it. I don't need to do laundry. I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful I got to sleep a little late. Just very surface, but it starts off your day in a more positive frame. So
Hmm.
the more and more you do it and the more you practice that gratitude muscle, then from there, it becomes a lot easier to then see the more grandiose gestures of gratitude, like your experience when you had your awakening that morning,
Right.
that you were grateful for life and grateful that you were here. It's a muscle that you could build up through time. And it's even more important to do it when you're at your lowest of lows,
Right.
because that's how you're going to get yourself out.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. When I'm doing my speeches or, having my workshops, I tell people to, when you're washing your hands, how we sing the birthday song or whatever to measure the time. I'm like, I call them mirror confirmations, where you're just washing your hands and you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're saying easy things like, I am priceless, I'm worthwhile, I'm happy to be alive, just different things like that. And just paying attention
Mhm.
to a more positive mindset and helping yourself out in that way. Just
Right. Mhm.
making a switch in your mind, like, okay, I'm going to be grateful and I'm going to be happy.
Right. Mhm.
And these are some reasons why.
Yes. Affirmations help so much with that. I love affirmations. I
Yeah.
do them all the time myself.
Yeah.
Tawanda, with everything that you've experienced, and you've experienced a lot between rape and suicidal ideation, attempts, and then the loss of your son,
Right.
for anybody who's listening right now who has gone through any of those things right now, or maybe is currently going through them, what is something that you would want them to be aware of?
I want them to be aware of their voice. You have a voice, so use it. I want them to know that don't sit in silence, don't sit alone. As you've mentioned, the numbers, there are so many people dealing with the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a community of support out there. So I want them to use your voice, reach out to someone. Don't be ashamed. No reason to be ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be ashamed, and your life matters. So remember that if you're dealing with something, have numbers or have somebody on speed dial that you can call, like, hey, I'm dealing with this, or hey, I have these thoughts. And when thoughts come in your mind, negative or depressive, you can combat that. You can make a switch and regain power with positive thoughts and a positive attitude. So don't sit alone, don't sit in silence, use your voice, reach out to someone. And when you have negative things coming in your mind, dismiss that and bring in the positive.
I love it. Such wise advice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For our listeners, how could they get a hold of you if they'd like to ask you questions after the show?
So you can reach me through my website, canvasesandconversation.com. I also have email, canvasesandconversation@gmail.com. So I can be reached in those ways.
Perfect. And we'll be sure to include you in the show notes as well so people can get a hold of you.
I also have a blog, morningmommy.info. So,
great.
Yeah.
We'll be sure that we include that one too.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tiwanda. This conversation was so beneficial, especially even for me, being able to talk to somebody with such a similar experience to what, I went through, and to provide me with some understanding on it. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to share my story and Anthony's journey.
You're welcome. And there you have it. If there's one thing about Tiwanda that I hope you took away from today's show, it's that regardless of how overwhelming and powerful your pain is, there are ways to express it and release it. The most important thing you can do for yourself is find a way that feels good to you to express your feelings creatively. For some, that may be through their words. For others, a paintbrush, a musical note, or even a coloring book. Giving your thoughts and feelings a path out of your mind and into this physical world is incredibly therapeutic and can help you heal in a healthy and efficient fashion. If you'd like to get a hold of Tiwanda, I went ahead and made sure to link up to her in the show notes. Also, I'd love to know what you thought of the episode. Take a screenshot or a photo of you listening, along with a caption of why you loved it, and post it to Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and tag me at I am Corrie Lowe, CORRIELO. I will be sharing our listeners' feedback and may feature yours. Also, as I mentioned in prior episodes, we're really working hard to get this show heard by as many people as possible. This is because we believe the stories shared on the Purpose podcast can help so many people facing adversity become inspired and motivated to act by using their challenges as fuel to ignite personal growth. You can help me with this by leaving the show a quick review. To do so, on Apple Podcasts, find us using the search feature. When you find us, hit the review tab. To write a review at the bottom, go ahead and enter your iTunes password, then tap the number of stars you'd like to leave along with your rating and draft your headline and review below it. Hit send, and you've helped us get this story in front of even more people who can benefit from it. I so appreciate you taking the time to join me today and cannot wait to share even more stories of resilience with you in upcoming episodes. I hope that Tiwanda's helps inspire you to take the initiative to find the power and purpose in your own story and to not let the story define you, but instead drive you. Until next time, don't stop, stay motivated, and always remember, tomorrow is a new day and a fresh start to the next story of your life.